Ms. Donnelly.
I'm Elaine Donnelly. I founded the Center for Military Readiness in 1993. In that year, Bill Clinton announced his intent to lift the ban on homosexuals in the military. He proposed a concept known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which Congress rejected. In fact, most of the problems we're hearing about today are coming about because the Department of Defense, Bill Clinton, imposed Don't Ask, Don't Tell on the military, even though the law says something different. If the law had been given a name of its own, it would have been called the Military Personnel Eligibility Act of 1993, because you see, it is all about eligibility, but it doesn't have a name of its own other than the technical name, Section 654, Title 10. We support this law. We do not support Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The law was passed with overwhelming bipartisan majorities, and it's been upheld as constitutional several times. The only compromise was the dropping of the question, are you homosexual? Used to be on induction forms. That question can be reinstated at any time, and it should be. Because to say that you can't ask questions about eligibility is like telling a bartender that you cannot serve liquor to people who are underage, but you cannot ask them for ID. It makes no sense. It's not good policy, but the law is good policy. The law is there, and it's designed to promote good order and discipline. I want to talk about the future. I'd like to talk about what would happen if you actually repealed this law. The result would be devastating because the military doesn't do things halfway. And if you say that this is in the tradition, the proud tradition of civil rights, which we have seen in our history in positive ways, if we say that a sexual minority from here on is going to have special rights, that means that anybody who disagrees is contrary to the zero tolerance policy. It means that anybody whose attitudes are different from what is advocated by the ACLU and the left, the San Francisco left, who want to impose their agenda on the military, those people become unacceptable, and they would have to eventually be forced out of the military. You see, when promotions are denied, that means they get the message they cannot stay in the military. We would lose thousands of people if they were told under a zero tolerance policy that you must accept the new paradigm, which is forced cohabitation of men and women with homosexuals in the military. Forced cohabitation in all branches of the service, all communities. I'm talking about the infantry, special operations forces, Navy SEALs, cramped submarines. We are not talking about a Hollywood world here. We're talking about real consequences for real people. If we say that this is going to be the new paradigm, we're going to tolerate absolutely no dissent, that would put a tremendous, perhaps unacceptable burden on people who do have religious convictions, or those who simply believe that the policy, the law as it is now, is a good idea. They would become unacceptable to the military and would be driven out. Some people have said, well, that's okay for the sake of diversity. We cannot afford to lose so many people if they disagree with this new policy of forced cohabitation of heterosexuals and homosexuals in the military. How would enforcement work? Well, if a female soldier reports an incident of harassment, she enjoys the presumption of truthfulness. But under the new civil rights standard or zero tolerance standard, if a male soldier reports or is made to feel that there is a sexual atmosphere that's unacceptable, the suspicion would be that he has intolerant attitudes. The military doesn't tolerate people with intolerant attitudes. That man is probably not going to make a complaint, but if he does, he will suffer serious sanctions. In the messy disputes that would ensue, commanders are supposed to sort all this out. You know, we have difficulties right now with sexual misconduct. We have issues with regard to male and female sexual misconduct of various kinds. If we want to increase that threefold, then we have a new policy that says we're going to have disputes or problems between male and female and female. I invite you to read in my testimony a letter from a young woman named Cynthia Yost who served in the Army, the experience she had with an assault. I invite you to think about her suggestion that when photographs were taken of her and her fellow soldiers in the shower, was this the kind of thing that we want to see in the future, especially in the days of the iPhone and the Internet? Do we want to have a sexualized atmosphere in our armed forces, all branches, submarines, infantry, all the rest of it. There is not enough time to go into all of the various kinds of things that would ensue, but perhaps I can talk about a couple of things. Number one, you will not get full information about what is happening in the field. We've had an incident just recently, a Navy chaplain who abused midshipmen, 2 other members of the service. He was HIV positive. He abused his authority. And yet, the record of his court-martial doesn't show homosexual conduct. It shows the worst things that he did, but you will not get a feedback of what is happening in the field because even Navy Times agreed we're not getting adequate information from the Department of Defense. You should ask about cases like Lamar Dalton, the soldier who was HIV positive, infected an 18-year-old. You need to think about this issue of HIV positivity. We have troops who are not deployable because of HIV positive status. The legislation to repeal the law says we should invite in everybody who was denied before. What is that going to do to our medical system? How does that encourage trust? How does that help our military to have strong discipline and morale? If we follow the example of the British military, they are now looking at the issue of transgenders in the military. They are very much into this model. They're different in their culture. They accepted a European court order to accept homosexuals in the military. We don't do that in our system. We have responsible people, people like you who look at these issues. We don't take orders from courts. I'd like to talk to you, if there is time, about many of the unconvincing arguments for repeal that we've heard. We keep hearing about polls. In an article that I wrote for Duke University Journal of Gender Law and Policy, I've analyzed every one of these reports. Every one of them falls apart under closer scrutiny. We don't need to make decisions based on polls. For instance, Zogby. They didn't mention the one question on the Zogby poll that mattered, of military people supposedly. Do you agree or disagree with allowing homosexuals to serve openly in the military? Only 26% agreed, but a combination of those who disagreed and were neutral was 69%. Now, you didn't hear about that poll unless you read the article that I wrote about it, but the Military Times polls have consistently been 57 to 59% opposed. The polls are by no means an argument for repealing the law. Discharges. How many discharges are there? The numbers are very small. You have my written testimony. The documentation is there. Pregnancy, weight loss standard violations, the discharges are much greater numbers. Is the Department of Defense not enforcing the law? Well, I would agree. The Department of Defense has been derelict. They have not enforced the law properly. When they suggest there's nothing against gays and lesbians being in the military based on sexual orientation, that is dissembling. The law doesn't even say that phrase, sexual orientation. It is so vague you cannot define it. It is based on conduct. A person who engages in that conduct and says so is someone who is not eligible to be in the military. Do we have shortages in certain categories? Linguists, yes, there are ways to resolve that. The number one way would be to reinstate that question. Why was the Defense Language Institute training people who were not eligible to be in the armed forces? That's where the problem is. The problem is not with the law itself. We've heard speculative claims, all based on guesstimates and suppositions and assumptions. 65,000 homosexuals in the military? Have you looked at that report and seen just how flimsy the research is? Use common sense. We are talking about common sense. If people who disagree are driven out of the military, you're going to lose thousands of people in the military. We can't afford that. Foreign militaries, we know their experience is very different. We know that what they do in their military is nothing like the demands that we have in our armed forces. We have the strongest military in the world. Good order discipline is important. My recommendation would be support the law, keep the law. Recommend that the Department of Defense enforce it properly. We should drop the don't ask, don't tell regulations put in place by Bill Clinton. They are administrative. They can be eliminated at any time. We need to keep priorities straight. This is the most important thing. Equal opportunity is important, but the needs of the military, our military, must come first. It's the only military we have, and we have to make sure that policy is the best that we can have for our brave men and women in the military. Thank you.
Thank you.